I still remember the exact moment my blood turned to ice. June morning, sun already warming the ground by 9 a.m., birds chirping like they didn't know the world had gone sideways. I stepped out the back door in my slippers, coffee in hand, the same way I had every morning for the last 8 years. Only this time, something was different. There it was. A stupid little sign, staked right into my backyard like a declaration of war. Private property. No trespassing. In blocky, aggressive font. At first, I thought it was a prank. Some neighborhood kid with too much time and a cruel sense of humor. But then I saw the fine print on the bottom, tiny cursive letters. By order of J.R. and Marilyn Whitaker. My in-laws. I laughed. Out loud. Not the kind of laugh that makes you feel better. The kind that empties your lungs and leaves a bitter taste in your mouth. A laugh with jagged edges. I dropped my coffee. Didn't even notice it shattered until I felt the warmth seep into my sock. Let me rewind. A year ago, I did something decent. Maybe even generous. I offered my wife's parents a piece of our backyard, our being the key word. They just downsized into a condo after selling their big colonial and missed having land. I had no problem with it at the time. Set up some raised beds, I said. Plant your damn tomatoes and zucchinis. No big deal. That's how it started. Just 2 planters. Then 4. Then they brought in these weird garden gnomes. Then a little fence. Then a shed. Suddenly, we had a literal scarecrow in the yard, like some straw-suited guardian warning me off my own grass. My wife, Angie, kept saying, let them have it. It's therapeutic for them. And I let it go. Because I was trying to be the good guy. But that morning, that sign, it was the first time I realized I wasn't just being accommodating. I was being erased. I ripped it out of the ground like I was pulling a dagger from my own back. The wooden stake cracked in half, and I tossed it into the compost pile they insisted I build to be more sustainable. Fitting, in a way, garbage returning to garbage. When Angie came down later, I was still sitting at the table, barefoot, my socks stained with cold coffee and damp soil. She didn't even notice. Oh, she said, glancing out the window, Dad's going to be upset. That sign was important to him. I looked at her for a long time. Really looked. Her face was the same as the one I fell in love with. But the words, those didn't come from the girl I married. What do you mean, important to him? I asked. Her brow furrowed like I was the irrational one. They've been maintaining that space for months. It's kind of their place now. Their place. My own backyard. The patch of earth I mowed, fertilized, paid taxes on, and fixed the damn fence around when a storm knocked it flat last winter. That's rich, I said. Calmly. Too calmly, I think. So do they pay rent now? Property tax? Water bills? Angie rolled her eyes and left the room like I was having a tantrum. But I wasn't mad. Not yet. Because I wasn't done. That day, I took a walk. Not a stroll, to think. A tactical retreat. I grabbed a pen and notebook. I began a list. Operation Reclamation, I wrote across the top. And beneath it, in small precise letters, I laid the first pieces of a plan. See, I'm not the yelling type. I don't throw dishes or sleep on the couch. I calculate. I build. I tear down quietly. And if they thought they could edge me out of my own land, they were about to learn something the hard way. They say a man's home is his castle. I used to believe that. But lately, mine was feeling more like a conquered outpost, flags raised in another family's name. After that sign, I couldn't see anything the same. The tomato stakes looked like spears. The scarecrow stared at me like a sentry. Even the bird bath had this smug stillness about it, like it knew something I didn't. So I started drawing. Not emotionally, literally. I pulled the original blueprint of the property from the filing cabinet in my office, the one marked House Docs, sandwiched between tax returns and insurance policies. Laid it out on the dining table and started sketching the backyard. Fence lines. Shed. Garden plots. Everything. Then I took out a red Sharpie and circled everything they touched. It was over 40% of my yard. That's not gardening. That's occupation. Angie walked in while I was doing it. What's all this? She asked, half curious, half condescending. Surveying, I said. She squinted at the plants. Don't be dramatic. I'm just trying to understand how much land I actually still own, I said, my voice flat as concrete. She opened her mouth to respond, but didn't. Just left again. Lately she'd been doing that a lot, exiting conversations instead of engaging with them. Like she thought if she left fast enough, the truth wouldn't catch up to her. That night, I emailed a property attorney. Hypothetically, I typed, if someone uses part of your land long enough and claims it's theirs, can they actually take it? The reply came faster than I expected. What you're describing could fall under adverse possession laws depending on your state, but it requires several years of exclusive, hostile, and continuous use without permission. Document everything. Keep a record of interactions. Without permission. I'd given permission. But the way things were turning, they were pretending like I hadn't. Like it was always theirs. That was the problem. Permission had become ownership in their eyes. So I started documenting. Quietly. No drama. No shouting. I took pictures of the garden. Logged dates. Noted when the in-laws came over. Even recorded a conversation where Marilyn muttered, "He never comes back here anyway. What's he so worked up about?" The next morning, I went to Home Depot and bought a roll of orange construction tape. The kind they use to mark property boundaries on sites. I strung it around the edge of their garden plot. When Angie asked what I was doing, I said, "Re-establishing perimeter security." She blinked. "You're joking." I wasn't. Not even a little. Her parents showed up that afternoon, right on cue. I watched from the kitchen window as her father, JR, stared at the tape like I'd installed a minefield. Then he marched up to the porch like a foreman looking to bark orders. "What's this supposed to mean?" he asked, gesturing back toward the yard. "It means we're going back to the original deal," I replied. "Garden space, not land annexation." He scowled. "You can't just." "I can," I said, cool and even. And I am. That night, Angie didn't speak to me. She went to bed early, turning away from me like I was radioactive. But I slept better than I had in months. Because you can't win a war until you admit you're in one. By the following weekend, the war wasn't just simmering, it was boiling. I came home from work Friday evening and spotted something new in the yard. My orange construction tape had been cut. Not cleanly, either. Jagged. Like someone had yanked it apart in a petty tantrum. I found the shreds in the compost pile. Real mature. Beside the garden shed, they'd added a new decorative sign, Whitaker Garden Sanctuary, written in curly, painted letters on a forestic slab of driftwood. There were even solar lights planted around it, as if they expected people to drive by at night and admire their conquest. I took a picture of it, printed it, labeled it Exhibit B. Saturday morning, Angie's parents were already out there before I had a chance to sip my coffee. JR wore one of those stupid wide-brimmed hats he always bragged about getting from a real cowboy store in Texas, acting like that gave him some landowner cred. Marilyn was trimming lavender like she was the damn Duchess of Cambridge. I stepped out onto the porch. "Hey, I need you both to clear the back half of the garden by the end of the month," I said. Marilyn stood up straight, clippers in hand. "Excuse me. I've decided to reseed the lawn. It's overgrown. You've got 2 weeks." She glanced at JR, who looked at me like I'd just keyed his car. "You gave us that space," he said. "I lent it," I corrected. "Lending means I can ask for it back." Angie stormed out from the kitchen behind me. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done a year ago," I said, without turning, drawing a line. Her voice sharpened. "You're being spiteful. And you've been asleep at the wheel," I snapped. "You let them plant their flag back here and forgot whose house they were standing behind." "Do you hear yourself?" she hissed, stepping closer. "They're my parents." "Exactly. Your parents. Not mine. Not ours. And definitely not landlords." She crossed her arms. "You're going to ruin everything over a garden." No. What ruined everything was the moment she stopped treating our house like ours. The moment she let them tell me, without hesitation, that my property was no longer mine to walk through. They never asked. Never even pretended. After the confrontation, I drove to my brother's place on the edge of town. He's a landscaper. Has his own equipment and a soft spot for chaos. "You want me to tear it out?" he asked, half laughing. "Not yet," I said. "First, I want a full quote. Materials, labor, topsoil, new turf, sprinkler install. Something real professional. I want it printed and dated." He nodded. "You sure you want to go this route?" I looked him dead in the eye. "They declared it theirs," I said. "Now I'm repossessing it." That night, I drafted an official notice. Nothing fancy, just a printed letter stating that all non-approved installations in the backyard must be removed by the 1st of next month, or they be disposed of during scheduled landscaping. Angie found it on the fridge the next morning, taped next to our grocery list. "You're serious," she said. "Deadly. You'd really destroy their garden." I met her eyes. "They already destroyed something, Angie." "My patience." She stared at the letter, then at me. "I don't know who you are anymore," she whispered. I smiled bitterly. "The guy who used to roll over is gone. Maybe it's time you met the man who finally stood up." She left the kitchen. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't go after her. You learn a lot about people when you threaten to take something back, especially something they never had a right to in the first place. The days after I posted that notice were strangely quiet. No surprise visits from the Whitakers. No passive-aggressive comments at the dinner table. Angie moved around the house like a ghost, silent, tense, eyes full of unspoken accusations. Every time she looked at me, it was like she was waiting for me to flinch, to fold. But I didn't, because I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. You see, I've been sleepwalking through my own marriage, letting her family dig their little trenches into my peace, letting Angie deflect, dismiss, deny. But now I could see the rot beneath the roots. A few days after the notice went up, I caught JR sneaking into the yard at dusk. He had a flashlight tucked under his arm and a measuring tape, like he was trying to prove something, maybe build a case. I watched from the upstairs window as he paced the garden like a sheriff inspecting land deeds in a western. I went outside and flipped on the porch light. He froze, caught like a kid with his hand in the cookie jar. Taking measurements? I called out. It's for future planning, he said stiffly. This space is important to us. So's my dignity, I replied. Funny how little concern anyone had for that. He grunted and left. Didn't even try to justify it. I guess even he knew how bad it looked. The next morning, a small envelope appeared on our porch. No postage. Just a folded letter inside, neatly typed on Marilyn's monogrammed stationery. To whom it may concern, and clearly it no longer includes us. We are deeply disappointed in your recent behavior. Family is supposed to mean compromise and understanding. We will be removing our garden equipment this weekend. Do not touch it. We will handle it ourselves. Marilyn and JR. No apology. No ownership. Just the same haughty entitlement wrapped in a tissue-thin veil of civility. I left it on the counter for Angie. She read it, folded it back up, and placed it in the trash without a word. That weekend, they came in with gloves and sour faces. Marilyn looked like she was attending a funeral. JR barely acknowledged me. They tore out planters, pulled up irrigation lines, and loaded their precious little shed into a U-Haul. And the whole time, Angie stood at the kitchen window, arms crossed, watching them work like it was some kind of tragedy. When it was over, they left without saying goodbye. The backyard looked like a battlefield. Strips of dead grass, scattered clumps of soil, broken roots like exposed nerves. I stepped outside and walked the perimeter, slow and methodical, like a man reclaiming stolen land. The silence out there was deeper than I expected. Not peaceful exactly, but clean, like fresh snow after a storm. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a beer and my brother's landscaping quote in my hand. Angie joined me, wrapped in her old cardigan, still clinging to the life that used to be. She didn't speak at first, just sat beside me like she wanted to feel close without admitting she'd ever let things drift. Finally, she said, "Was it worth it?" I didn't look at her, just stared out at the empty patch of dirt. "That depends," I said. "Are we building something new, or are we just clearing space for the next lie?" She didn't answer, but I think we both knew the answer already. After the Whitakers cleared out, the yard looked like a crime scene. The soil was ripped, the grass torn up like someone had fought for it and lost. I didn't clean it right away. I wanted to look at it for a few days. Needed the reminder. Sometimes the wound has to stay open long enough for the lesson to sink in. Angie, on the other hand, couldn't even look out the back window. Every time she passed it, her eyes flicked away like the sight might physically burn her. It was quiet in the house, but not peaceful. It was that loaded silence, the kind that sounds like the house is holding its breath. On Tuesday, she came home with a shopping bag from some high-end boutique and placed it on the kitchen counter. "A new set of towels for the downstairs bathroom," she said, too casually. I nodded, but didn't speak. I knew what she was trying to do, patch the crack with cosmetics. Pretend the foundation hadn't just shifted under us. "You can buy new linens, Angie. Doesn't mean the structure isn't rotten." Wednesday morning, I opened my email and found a message from JR. It was a scant copy of a property line diagram he dug up from some dusty municipal archive, clearly trying to show that the garden had technically been within shared usable space. A final jab from a man who couldn't leave anything without marking it first. I forwarded it to my trash folder without reading the rest. I didn't need to win a legal battle. I'd already reclaimed something more valuable, clarity. But clarity comes at a cost. That Thursday, I came home to find Angie sitting at the dining room table with her old wedding photo album. We hadn't looked through it in years. It still smelled faintly of ink and cheap leather. Our younger faces smiled from beneath glossy plastic sleeves, two kids who thought love meant the same thing as loyalty. Funny how you can look straight into someone's eyes and not see the betrayal that's coming. I've been thinking, she said, not looking up. Maybe we rushed into the yard thing. You think? I said. I'm just saying, maybe I should have set boundaries too. With them. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was as close as Angie got. She'd never been good at admitting fault. Always preferred to sweep tension under a rug and call it compromise. The problem is, rugs can only hide so much before you start tripping over them. I'm going to rebuild it, I said. The yard. She looked up. By yourself. I shrugged. Maybe. Maybe I'll hire someone. But I'm designing it myself. Every inch. Something in her face cracked, but she covered it fast. You know, she said quietly, they didn't mean to take over. They just got comfortable. No, I said. They didn't get comfortable. They were allowed to. She didn't have a response to that. I went to the garage that night, dusted off my old toolbox, and pulled out the measuring wheel. If I was going to rebuild my yard, I was going to do it right. I drafted a plan, not just for the grass and the fence, but for a patio, a fire pit, a space I wanted. No more compromise for the sake of keeping peace. I printed a copy and pinned it to the corkboard above my workbench. Project Ground Zero. That's what I wrote at the top. The irony didn't escape me. The first thing I did was buy a new shovel. It wasn't symbolic. I just needed one that wasn't bent at the neck from years of lazy maintenance, kind of like the marriage. Funny how tools and relationships degrade the same way. Not in one loud snap, but with 1,000 little neglects. Home Depot. Aisle 12. Fiberglass handle. Reinforced steel. Felt good in my hands. Solid. Like it was made for reclaiming things. Angie didn't ask about it when I came home. Just watched as I carried it past the porch and out into the battlefield that used to be our yard. She stood behind the screen door for a while, arms folded, then disappeared. I started digging. Not furiously, not carelessly, deliberately. Every scoop was part of a plan. I marked out the corners for the fire pit, dug up the patch where their gnome statues used to stand, and laid the groundwork for a raised deck. This wasn't just landscaping, it was architectural therapy. Around sunset, I sat down on the overturned bucket I'd been using as a stool and looked out over the mess. My mess now. My land, my sweat, my decisions. That's when I noticed her. Marilyn. Standing just across the street, holding one of those beige grocery bags that fancy old people use when they don't want to be seen carrying paper or plastic. She wasn't smiling. Just watching. Like she was waiting for me to wave or come say hello. I didn't. I turned back to the pit and kept digging. The next day, Angie came into the yard holding a bottle of cold water. She handed it to me without a word. I saw your mother yesterday, I said. I know, she replied. She told me you were acting erratic. I snorted. Sure. A man working in his own backyard must be losing it. Angie didn't laugh. Just looked down at the patch of half-turned soil. What are you going to build back here? A wall, I said, deadpan. She blinked. You're kidding. Only a little. I let the silence hang before softening my tone. Deck. Fire pit. Native garden beds. A seating area. Maybe even a small pond if I can dig deep enough. She chewed her lip. I always wanted a hammock. I glanced at her. Did you? She nodded. Funny, I said. You never mentioned that before. Too busy defending the Whitaker Preserve, I guess. Her face darkened. You're still angry. No, I said, shaking my head. I was angry before. Now I'm something else. What? I stood, stretching my back. Clear. She didn't follow me when I walked toward the garage, but she stayed there a while, staring at the space I'd cleared, as if seeing it for the first time through my eyes. Later that evening, a letter arrived. From JR. Typed. Formal. The kind of letter that pretends it's respectful while barely hiding the threat in every word. We understand you're making changes to the yard. Please be advised that certain irrigation features and herb beds installed by us remain under protection of state planting rights and cooperative usage laws. We respectfully request a pause on any disruptive construction until further legal clarification is obtained. They were trying to intimidate me. I didn't reply. I scanned it, saved it in a folder labeled Idiots, and moved on. Because once you've taken your land back, once you've decided to stop explaining yourself to people who see you as a stepping stone, you don't waste time arguing about roots that were never theirs to begin with. You ever realize your marriage was just one long negotiation with someone who already made a deal behind your back? I stood in the yard 2 days later, watching a contractor unload materials for the new deck. Cedar planks, concrete mix, Joists, rebar, all of it. I'd finally hired a guy my brother recommended, a quiet worker named Julio who didn't ask questions and didn't bat an eye when I handed him a hand-drawn plan labeled The Reclamation. Julio just looked at it and said, "Nice lines. We'll get it done." Meanwhile, Angie was inside, pacing like a ghost trapped in a memory. I could feel the tension through the window, her eyes on me, on the boards being dropped in the driveway, on the giant plastic-wrapped fire pit kit labeled "Some Assembly Required." She didn't say anything until dinner. "Do you think all this is necessary?" she asked. She wasn't talking about the lumber. Not really. I looked up from my plate. "You mean after your parents put a border fence around my spine and tried to plant their flag?" She flinched. Good. A little discomfort meant she still had a pulse. "You know it wasn't meant that way," she said. "Intentions don't matter," I said, voice even. "Only results." And the result was me realizing I lived in a house where respect is leased and revoked without notice. She pushed her plate away. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I leaned in. "No, I'm finally seeing things in proportion. For the first time." She stood up, half angry, half ashamed, and left the table. I didn't go after her. 3 days later, Julio and I had the frame of the deck in place. Wide, solid, uncompromising. I stood on it like a man claiming a mountain peak. He asked if I wanted steps on both sides or just the one that faced the house. "Just one," I said. "Other side gets a railing. I want a view, not visitors." He smirked. "Got it." Later that afternoon, I found another envelope in the mailbox. This time, hand-delivered again, no stamp. Inside, a printout of a city ordinance. Highlighted text. Something about disruptive renovations requiring neighborly consultation. And a handwritten note in Maryland's loopy script. "We're concerned that this structure may obstruct our seasonal sunlight pattern and disturb the pollinator-friendly flora in nearby lots. Please reconsider, or we may be forced to involve local zoning review. Sincerely, M. Whitaker." I laughed. Out loud. Right there in the driveway. She thought I was scared of sunlight. I went inside, scanned the letter, filed it in the noise folder I created next to idiots, and poured myself a bourbon. That evening, Angie came down the stairs holding an old photo album again. Different one this time, labeled First Home in cursive. She opened it and flipped through pages of us smiling in front of this house when we first bought it. Me with my arms slung over her shoulders, her laughing with her hair stuck in lip gloss. 2 kids. 2 fools. We had hope in our teeth back then. "I miss this," she said, pointing at one picture of us painting the fence together. "When we were a team." I nodded slowly. "Me too. But you don't act like it," she said. "Lately it's like, it's just you against everything." I looked her dead in the eye. "That's because I realized I've been standing in a crowd for years thinking we were side by side. Turns out, I was just in the way." She didn't cry. Not yet. But the way her face cracked at the corners told me the foundation was finally starting to buckle. The next morning, the deck was done. I brought out a single lawn chair, placed it at the edge, and sat there sipping my coffee like a man on conquered land. One chair, one view, one voice in my head whispering, "You did this. You took it back." The deck had changed things. It wasn't just wood and nails, it was a monument. Proof that I could tear something down, lay new foundations, and not ask anyone's damn permission. Even the birds seemed to land a little softer near it, like they sensed a new hierarchy out here. I'd set up my single lawn chair like a throne, facing west for the sunsets. Just me, my coffee, and the fire pit that would soon see more warmth than my marriage had in a year. That morning, I found Angie outside. She stood in the spot where the Whitaker sanctuary used to be. The soil was still uneven, roots sticking out like bones from a grave. She was holding a spade in one hand, a half-full trash bag in the other. "I'm cleaning it up," she said without turning. "The rest of the debris." I nodded, stepping down from the deck. "Didn't expect that. I figured if I helped build it, I should help bury it," she said. I almost didn't recognize the tone in her voice. Not defensive, not passive, just honest. "You know what I realized," she said, still digging. "I never asked you what you wanted the yard to be." "No," I replied. "You asked them." Her shoulders sank slightly. "I let them take up space because it was easier than standing up to them. And in the process, I said quietly, you shoved me out of my own home." She turned then. For once, she didn't try to explain or soften the blow. She just nodded. "You're right." Those 2 words, so rare from her lips, hit harder than any argument. You ever wonder why I didn't fight harder back then? I asked. All the time, she said. And I hated that you didn't. I was waiting, I said, stepping closer. Waiting to see if you'd notice I was disappearing. Angie looked down at the half-filled bag of dirt-stained garden clutter, bits of broken ceramic gnomes, splintered signs, rusted trowels, relics of a campaign that didn't belong here anymore. I noticed, she said. Too late. We stood in silence. Not the angry kind this time. The kind where two people finally stop pretending they're okay. I walked to the edge of the deck and pointed. That spot's getting a pond next. Water lilies, maybe a little bench. Something quiet. She nodded. I like that. You can help, I said. But only if you ask first. She cracked a faint smile. Deal. Later that night, I found a text on my phone. From JR. Saw the construction. Seems a little extreme just to make a point. Hope you realize this won't bring peace, only tension. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because he didn't matter anymore. That night, Angie came out onto the deck and sat beside me in a second chair she'd quietly placed next to mine. No talking. No performance. Just two people watching the sky bleed into fire. I didn't know what came next for us. Didn't even know if we could be rebuilt. But I did know this. The land was mine again. And I wasn't giving up another inch. The next move didn't come from Angie. It came from them. Saturday morning. I was halfway through trenching out the perimeter for the pond when a glossy black SUV pulled up out front. Of course it was a Cadillac. JR always needed the world to know how well he'd done. The engine idled for a moment like it was contemplating whether the property was worth stepping onto. Then Marilyn emerged. Pearls. Tinted sunglasses. And that brittle kind of smile rich women wear to courtrooms and funerals. She didn't head toward the front door. No, she walked right around the side of the house like it was still hers, straight into my backyard. Like nothing had happened. I didn't greet her. Just kept digging. Let the silence stretch until it got awkward enough to break bones. I thought I'd stop by, she said, voice thin as lacquer. See how the renovation is going. You mean the liberation, I said, not looking up. She exhaled through her nose. You're really going to hold a grudge over a garden? I finally met her eyes. No. I'm holding a grudge over the fact that you walked into my life, my home, and decided your presence was a privilege I was lucky to tolerate. And then tried to make that permanent. I never. You did. And then you backed it with signs, threats, and passive-aggressive little letters. You turned my yard into your playground and my marriage into your chessboard. She didn't blink. Just shifted her weight like she was measuring how far she could still push. You're turning Angie against her own family, she said. No, I said. I'm just not letting her family turn me into a doormat anymore. She gave a tight little nod. We tried to be generous with you. I hope you understand how much patience that took. I stared at her like she was made of glass. I'll put that on your headstone, I said. She left without another word. Cadillac pulled out slow, tires barely whispering over the street. But I swear to God the air smelled like poison after she drove away. That night, Angie found me pacing the yard. I'd been going over every square inch of the renovation plan, refining it like a military blueprint. She watched me for a while before finally asking. What did she say? Nothing I didn't already know, I replied. She thinks this is about plants. About turf. It's not. Then what is it? I stopped pacing, looked at her full on. It's about the fact that the second I started acting like a man with a spine, your parents acted like I declared war. Because in their world, a husband's value is how quietly he steps aside. Angie swallowed hard. She's going to keep pushing, I added. So is he. They're not done. She nodded slowly. Then let them push. I'm not going back to who I was either. That stopped me cold. Because for once, it didn't sound like something she was saying to calm the waters. It sounded like she meant it. The next morning, I received a formal complaint in the mail. Zoning board seal on the envelope. Anonymous submission. Apparently someone was concerned about an unlicensed water feature being constructed within flood-prone property lines. Cute. I smiled, filed it in the resistance folder, and picked up the phone. Called Julio. Hey, I said. We're adjusting the pond plans. Gonna need a deeper foundation and a certified drainage path. Think you can make it look expensive? He laughed. I can make it look like Versailles. Good, I said. Make it undeniable. If they wanted a war over dirt, they were going to get a kingdom. The Versailles comment? Not a joke. Julio brought in a landscape architect. A guy with wire-rimmed glasses and a beard so neat it looked stenciled on. He talked in terms like aesthetic narrative and waterscape continuity. I just told him to build me a pond that would make the neighbors whisper and my in-laws choke on their morning tea. In a week, we had the liner poured, pumps installed, and the beginnings of a tiered rock wall forming around the edges like a miniature canyon. The water was still murky, but you could already see it, the vision coming to life. Stillness, control, design. Meanwhile, the Whitakers were unraveling. It started small. A subtle coldness in Angie's voice after a phone call with her mom. The occasional text she'd read, roll her eyes, and delete without replying. I didn't push her for details. I didn't have to. She was starting to see it too. The way her parents never asked, only expected. The way they used politeness like a scalpel, carving guilt into her with passive grace. The way they weaponized words like concern and family to keep her shackled to obligation. I was building a pond. She was clawing her way out of quicksand. We were both doing demolition. One morning, I found her sitting on the deck alone, hair still wet from a shower. No makeup, wrapped in a robe she hadn't worn in years. She looked small, but not fragile, like someone recalibrating the controls on their own body. Mom called, she said. Said she's worried about my mental health. I raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, because you're not defending her invasion of my yard. She said your renovation mania is disturbing my sense of balance. I laughed. Tell her she can find balance at a yoga retreat. This is a boundary, not a breakdown. Angie smirked. I think I finally saw it today. Saw what? The pattern. How they use me as a buffer. How they whisper poison, then ask why I'm sick. I leaned on the railing beside her. That's what they do. They plant weeds and complain the garden looks messy. That afternoon, Julio's team finished the pond foundation. Flat, symmetrical, perfect. We hadn't added the koi or lilies yet, but the water was clear and moving. Alive. I stood on the deck with a beer in hand, watching it swirl. Angie came out with her phone. They want to visit, she said. This weekend. Not a chance, I replied instantly. I told them the same. I turned slowly. You did? Yep. Told them they can come for dinner when they stop acting like foreign diplomats negotiating a ceasefire. I stared at her for a long time, not saying a word, just absorbing that. She finally exhaled. I know I should have said it a year ago, but I wasn't ready. Doesn't matter, I said. You said it now. She stepped up beside me and looked out over the yard. You really did it, huh? Took it all back. I nodded, piece by piece. She rested her hand on my arm. Mind if I help you build the next piece? I hesitated. Then I nodded again. Start by picking out the koi, I said. But no fish names like Princess Sparkles. I want dignity in this pond. She laughed, real and full, for the first time in months. Later that evening, I received a voicemail. Mr. Whitaker here, the voice said, tight and clipped. I'd like a word before this situation escalates. We've been more than patient. Don't make us take this further. I deleted it. The only thing escalating was my sense of peace. They say real peace isn't quiet. It's the sound of someone finally shutting the hell up. That weekend, I grilled steaks on the deck while Julio added the finishing touches to the pond. Flat stone borders, a few well-placed boulders, even a curved bench that made the whole space feel like it belonged on a magazine cover. Angie brought out glasses of iced tea, and for once, we looked like a couple instead of co-tenants in a Cold War. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced down, sighed, and handed it to me. A text from Marilyn. I hope you enjoy your little man cave yard. But don't forget, appearances can be deceiving. We're still family. That doesn't change. Beneath it, a picture taken from across the street of our backyard. My jaw tightened. They're spying now? I said. Angie folded her arms. She's bluffing, trying to stay relevant. No, I said. She's marking territory, like a stray cat in pearls. I paced the edge of the pond, staring down at the reflection. The water was still, calm, but underneath, I could feel the tremors. She wasn't just annoyed we'd rebuilt the yard. She was furious we'd done it without her. See, people like Marilyn thrive on one thing, control. And when you take that away, they don't leave, they lurk. Wait. Needle. Hope you break and invite them back in. But I built something solid now. Brick by brick. Inch by inch. Not just in the yard, but in myself. And I wasn't about to hand her the keys to it. Monday morning, I visited City Hall. Not for them, for me. Filed for a fence permit. 6-foot cedar privacy. Reinforced gate. No gaps. No sight lines. I even picked the stain. deep mahogany. Something that said fortress, not please stop by. When I got home, Angie was on the porch, phone to her ear. Her back was stiff, voice low but sharp. No, Mom. I'm not asking him to reconsider. I told you, he's doing what he wants with his property. Pause. I'm not caught between you two. I'm finally not between you two. There's a difference. She ended the call, didn't speak for a moment, then turned to me, voice trembling but firm. She said I was letting a man turn me against my own blood. I nodded, because she knows she can't control you anymore. That scares her more than anything. Angie stared out at the pond, silent for a long while. I used to think love meant keeping peace. It doesn't, I said. It means building something that doesn't rot when you stop pretending. The next day, a letter arrived in a crisp envelope with an attorney's letterhead. To Mr. and Mrs., our last name. My clients, Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker, are requesting a mediated family dialogue to address recent hostility, property concerns, and perceived emotional distress. Should you refuse to engage, they may consider other formal options. I read it twice. Then I poured a glass of scotch, took it out to the pond, and lit the letter on fire. Angie watched it burn in my hand. Didn't say a word, just nodded. We were done playing by their rules. Something about burning that letter changed the weather in my chest. Not a rage, not anymore. That part had burned off weeks ago. What was left was harder, calmer, like steel cooled under pressure. The Whitakers had made their move, legal threats masked as invitations to mediate. As if this were a boardroom dispute over quarterly reports, not a backyard invaded and a marriage nearly strangled. They wanted a seat at the table. I'd already burned the table down. I spent the next week with Julio putting up the fence. 6 feet of thick cedar, stained dark and sealed tight. Not just to block them out, but to shut them up. By the third day, you couldn't see the street anymore from our deck. No more wandering eyes. No more surprise walk-ups. Just our house, our yard, our rules. Angie watched it go up in silence. She helped, too, handed me nails, held boards in place, even brought Julio beers. But she didn't say much until the final post was set. Then she looked at the finished fence and said, "Feels like armor." Not armor, I corrected. Just peace with a backbone. That night, she showed me her own kind of rebellion. "I'm changing my phone number," she said, holding out her cell. I blinked. Seriously? Yeah. Mom's group texts. Voicemails. Passive-aggressive scripture quotes. I'm done. I didn't say anything right away. I just reached out, took the phone, and deleted every message from Marilyn and JR in her inbox, then handed it back. Clean slate, I said. She smiled. Not the polite kind. The real kind. The one I hadn't seen since before the garden war began. 3 days later, the Whitakers made their final attempt. This time, they didn't write. They showed up. Middle of a Tuesday. I was in the yard skimming leaves out of the pond when I heard the crunch of tires in the gravel. I peeked around the fence. Their Cadillac. Front and center. Like they were arriving for a coronation. I stayed behind the gate, didn't even open it. Just waited. A knock. Hello. Marilyn's voice, muffled and sweet in that poison-laced way of hers. We just want to talk. Another knock. Then JR's voice. Lower. Firmer. You owe us a conversation, son. Son. He always used that word like a leash. I took a deep breath and spoke through the gate. No conversation. No visit. This property is now fully enclosed and monitored. Any further attempts to contact us will be treated as harassment. Silence. Then Marilyn again, sharper now. We're family. You can't just shut us out like this. I smiled. Watch me. There was a pause. Then tires spun against gravel. I listened to them drive away, slower than usual. Like the car didn't want to let go. Like it knew the road back wasn't opening again. That night, Angie came home from work and found a single white envelope taped to the outside of the new gate. No name. Just the words. Think of the consequences. No signature. No return address. She held it like it was radioactive. I took it, opened it, read it once. It was a list typed of local divorce attorneys. 5 names. Each one underlined. No threats. Just suggestions. If you want out, here's how. Angie's hands shook. I folded the paper in half, slowly. They're trying to scare you, she whispered. No, I said. They're trying to scare you back into obedience. She stared at me. Do you want out? I asked. She shook her head. Hard. Then we toss this, I said. And if they ever leave another note like this? They won't, she interrupted. Because next time, I answer the door. I burned the envelope that night. Didn't shred it. Didn't toss it. Burned it. Because that's what you do with things meant to poison your foundation. You don't file them away for evidence. You erase their power. The list of attorneys curled into black ash in the fire pit, glowing like fireflies before collapsing into nothing. Angie watched, arms crossed, jaw tight. She didn't ask me to stop. Didn't say a word. Just watched the flames flicker like she was finally watching her childhood illusions burn with it. When it was gone, she whispered, "They used to be kind." I looked at her. No, they used to be clever. There's a difference. In the days that followed, something shifted inside our home. A silence, yes, but not the kind that chokes. The kind that gives room. Angie stopped tiptoeing. She started playing music again in the mornings. Not loud, but present. She even took an old sketchbook out of the closet and left it on the kitchen table. She hadn't drawn in years. And me? I slept. Not tossing, not turning. Just real sleep. Deep and uninterrupted. Because for the first time in forever, the war drums had stopped. The gate stayed shut. No letters. No calls. No cars lingering across the street. I think the Whitakers realized we weren't bluffing. They thought this was a tantrum. But this was a break. Permanent. Strategic. Surgical. One evening, while we were eating dinner out on the deck, Angie said something that stuck with me. "You know what I realized?" she asked, chewing slowly. "They never once asked how we were doing." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean all this time, through the fence, the pond, the arguments, they never once said, 'Are you okay?' Or, 'What do you two need?' It was always about them. Their rights. Their feelings. Their garden." She said the word garden like it was an infection. I nodded. Because they never saw us as people. Just extensions of their plans. She set down her fork. "I let that happen." "Yeah," I said. "But now you don't." The koi arrived that weekend. 4 of them. Big, bright, elegant swimmers. Red, white, and gold. We didn't name them. Felt too cute for what they represented. They were symbols of life and reclaimed space. Of motion and stillness. Of us. We sat on the bench near the pond and watched them circle, slowly, the water catching sunset and ripples. Angie reached out and held my hand. No words. No apology. Just presence. Sometimes, healing doesn't show up as fireworks. Sometimes, it's a woman squeezing your hand while fish move quietly beneath the surface. That night, I got an email. From an address I didn't recognize at first. Marilyn-hope@samail.com. Subject line. "I hope you're satisfied." I didn't open it. I archived it, unsubscribed from the pain, and blocked the sender. Because here's the truth, Marilyn. No, I'm not satisfied. I'm so much more than that. The war had ended. No more letters, no more ambushes, no more poison whispers in envelopes or messages signed with guilt. The fence stood tall. The pond reflected the sky like it had never known trouble. And still, there was something off. Peace, it turns out, makes you hear the echoes louder. Because after all that fire, after the lies, the turf war, the invasion masked as help, there were still cracks. And cracks don't vanish just because you stop noticing them. One night, I walked through the house with the lights off, barefoot, quiet. I passed our old hallway mirror and caught a glimpse of myself, just a silhouette. Not the angry man from before. Not the pushover from years past. Just a guy in the middle of rebuilding. And that's when it hit me. I didn't trust her. Not fully. Not yet. Angie was trying. I could see it in 1,000 ways. She wasn't defending them anymore. She didn't flinch when I mentioned Marilyn. She joined me in the garden, brought beers to Julio's crew, even painted the back gate a deep forest green. Her idea, not mine. She was present. But trust isn't rebuilt with gestures. It's rebuilt with consistency. And hers had a timer on it. I was waiting to see if she'd snap back. If her loyalty was real, or just another form of apology wrapped in comfort. One morning, I asked her, if they called today, if they begged, would you let them back in? She didn't blink, didn't falter. No, she said. They were never in. They just took space while we were too polite to say no. That was a better answer than I expected, but not a final one. Because truth is, I was still looking for cracks in her words, measuring her tone like a contractor checking load-bearing walls. A man can't rebuild if he's afraid the roof will cave again. A week later, I got a call from Julio. Your wife was out here this morning, he said. Before I got in. I paused. What for? She asked about putting in a second bench. Said she wanted a spot to sit alone. Said it's the first place she's felt like herself in years. That stopped me cold. Not because it was suspicious, but because it was real. It wasn't about pleasing me or appeasing guilt. It was about her, finding oxygen in a space where she'd been holding her breath for years. Maybe we were both victims of the same parasite, just hosted differently. That night, I asked her something I hadn't dared until then. Why didn't you fight them sooner? She was curled up in the chair by the window, sketching something I couldn't see from where I sat. She paused, set the pencil down. Because I didn't know I was allowed to, she said. I thought being a daughter meant never saying no. I thought being a wife meant absorbing the hit. And I thought you didn't care enough to step in. I stood there, silent. Then she looked up at me. But you did. Not with yelling or ultimatums. You didn't ask me to choose. You just rebuilt. And I finally saw what it meant to have a choice. It wasn't an apology. It was a confession. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I didn't feel angry. I felt understood. The following Sunday morning, I stepped into the yard barefoot. The grass, the new grass, was coming in now, fresh and soft and proud, not the patchy excuse that came before it. The pond rippled like silk under a breeze, and the koi darted near the surface with that elegant, unhurried confidence of creatures that don't know what betrayal feels like. Angie was already outside. She sat on that second bench she asked for, quiet, focused, sketchbook balanced on her knees. I didn't interrupt her, just watched for a moment from the edge of the deck. There was something about her face I hadn't seen in years. Stillness. Not resignation. Not fatigue. Just stillness. It was like watching someone breathe for the first time without a hand pressing on their chest. She saw me watching. You like it? She asked, nodding to the space around us. I do, I said. And I like that you're not asking if it's okay. She smiled. I stopped waiting for permission. Later that day, we added a few final touches. A pair of solar lanterns near the pond's edge. A string of warm lights along the back of the deck. Nothing too decorative, nothing performative. Just ours. She asked if she could plant something. Just one thing. Something from her, not her family. Something that wouldn't grow out of obligation. I said yes. She chose lavender. I used to hate it, she said, kneeling in the dirt. Because my mom insisted on it. Every garden, every bed, every season. But I think I hated what it stood for. Not the plant. Now, she said, she wanted it to mean something different. Not control. Not routine. Just calm. The next day, I received another envelope. This time from a different sender. A real estate agency. Inside, a printed flyer. A familiar house for sale on Sycamore Lane, Maryland and JR's place. Big, blue shutters. White trim. Garden beds withering in the photo like they were already giving up. Underneath, in small type. Inquiries welcome. Sellers relocating out of state. I stared at it for a long time. Then I pinned it to the corkboard in the garage, right beside the original landscaping blueprint I'd drawn months ago. 2 blueprints. One of where it all began. One of how it all ends. I didn't celebrate. Didn't gloat. That wasn't the point. This wasn't revenge. This was relief. That evening, Angie sat beside me on the deck. I saw the flyer, she said softly. I nodded. It's over, you know. She didn't ask if I meant the war, or the fear, or the spell her parents cast on our life. She just said, yeah, I felt it. We didn't toast. Didn't make it ceremonial. We just sat together, 2 survivors of the same quiet siege, watching the lights dance across our pond like stars drifting on water. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt like I'd healed. 3 weeks passed. No sightings. No texts. No thinly veiled threats scribbled on embossed stationery. The Whitaker house had a fresh, sold sign on the lawn. The shutters were closed, the driveway empty. And for once, there was nothing beneath it all, no trapdoor, no sting in the tail. They were gone. But silence can be loud when you're used to battle cries. One morning, I opened the mailbox and found a single envelope. Plain. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It was of the old garden, ours, before the invasion. Before the signs, the compost diplomacy, the territorial scuffles over tomatoes. Just a blurry shot, likely from Angie's phone, of the yard when it was still shared. Peaceful, naive. Taped to the back of the photo was a small yellow sticky note. There was a time we were all happy. I don't know where it went. No name. But I didn't need one. It was Marilyn's handwriting. Sharp. Neat. Too neat. I stared at it for a long while. Not with fury. Not even bitterness. Just exhaustion. Because even in goodbye, she couldn't help herself. Had to leave one more whisper. One more suggestion that this whole thing was some unfortunate drift, like no one ever picked up a sword and drove it into someone else's piece. I almost tossed it, but I didn't. I put it in a drawer. Not because I cared, but because someday, I wanted to remember what manipulation looked like when it started to lose. That same night, Angie and I sat by the pond. She was barefoot. Her feet dangled near the water while the koi circled slowly below. She'd started naming them after classical composers, Chopin, Debussy, Brahms, Liszt. I let her. It felt honest and oddly fitting. She turned to me. Do you think I'm still her daughter? It wasn't a trick question. It was the kind you ask when you're unraveling your own lineage. You'll always be her daughter, I said. But you don't have to be her mirror. Angie exhaled like that line released a pressure valve somewhere deep in her chest. I still feel guilty sometimes, she admitted. Like I pulled the plug. You didn't, I said. You just stopped feeding the machine. We watched the pond for a while after that, not speaking. Sometimes the loudest piece comes when you let silence just be silence. I started building a shed that week. Nothing fancy. Just a place to store the tools, the fertilizer, the things I'd used to remake this place. Every screw I drilled, every beam I raised, it wasn't about what I was storing. It was about what I'd already put away.